Hello, everyone. Welcome to this particularly timely installment of Foreign Affairs Live. On this beautiful late summer, early fall evening, you all could have been strolling in Central Park or having a drink al fresco or doing any number of uplifting, hopeful, feel-good, life-affirming things. But instead, you've chosen to come here for a conversation about the Middle East. So anyone having second thoughts, now's your chance. You can still do that. But actually, we're quite glad that you're here. It's also always nice to see a slightly younger crowd here at the council. There's a pretty good smartphone to hearing aid ratio tonight. That's always hopeful. We started talking about tonight's topic a couple of months ago when we were having an editorial meeting. We were discussing various pitches that we were getting, stories about the end of the state system in the Middle East, the end of sykes-picot, and being a bunch of know-it-all foreign affairs editors, we sort of thought, oh, this is flash in the pan. We're not going to be talking about this past another couple of weeks or so. But here we are, 3 months later. We're not only still talking about this question and all the questions that come from it, but it's become a really important one. We could not be luckier than to have this particular panel here with us tonight to sort out the ramifications of this question and try to get at some answers. We're joined tonight by Michael Doran. Michael's a senior fellow at the Center for Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution. To his left is Murtaza Hussain. Murtaza is a journalist, a political commentator. He's now with the Intercept. And last is Bilal Saab, who's a senior fellow for Middle East Security at the Brent Scowcroft Center for International Security at the Atlantic Council. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming tonight.
You're welcome.
Before we begin, I just have a few quick housekeeping notes. This event is on the record. The Twitter hashtag for tonight, if you're tweeting, is FALive, but please silence your mobiles. You don't want to be that person. And once we're done, I'm sure that you all will be inspired to study international affairs even more formally. So I invite you to join us upstairs for a reception, the ASPIA reception upstairs. Why don't we just get started? Mike, I'm going to start with you. The question that we're faced here is sort of simple, but also complicated and easy to express and hard to understand. I'm going to ask you to do the lion's share opening it up. I want to know, do you buy the premise that behind our setup tonight, that we are in this moment where the state system in the Middle East is under a severe challenge, where sykes-picot is, really the viability of it is questionable going forward? Is that a conceit that you buy, or is that just sort of an overblown sentiment at the moment?
No, I think I buy it. I buy it from Jihadistan, that area from Baghdad to Aleppo, maybe Baghdad to Beirut. I think the order in that region is really up for grabs. And I'd be surprised if when the dust settles, the state boundaries that we have known are going to be the state boundaries that we knew until yesterday are going to be the same.
Why is this time different, though? Because we've asked this question. People, various iterations, have sat at the Council on Foreign Relations decades ago and had the same conversation about threats to the regional order, and somehow it survives. Why is this time different?
I don't know about threats to the regional order. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what that means, but that region. I mean, now we have ISIS from just outside of Baghdad to Aleppo, and when I look at the president's strategy. Which represents the will of the status quo forces, I don't see how they're really going to dislodge them, how this strategy is going to lead to dislodging them from that area. And as long as they're there, then the boundary between Syria and Iraq is no more.
Right. Murtaza, I want to ask you, this frame that we're using tonight to talk about this issue, it's one that's very familiar to people who attend council events, who go to dinner parties in the Boston to Washington corridor, this question about, is sykes-picot going to survive? I'm curious about, from your reporting and your reading on the region, is this a frame that people in the region actually use? Is this the way that they would talk about this?
I think one thing people don't appreciate is that people in the region, how much they resented the Sykes-Picot borders in a great degree. And even though ISIS is certainly not popular, the idea of ability to travel freely between these areas has always been a great desire of people in the region. And I'm not sure if it's settled in that this new reality will be permanent or people have accepted that, but certainly it's the expression of some desires which were legitimate, of course, in a way which is not supported by most people. And it remains to be seen whether this will actually be the new political alignment, those borders will cease to exist. But certainly I agree with Mike that it's not going to be, at the end of this, I don't predict that the borders that they existed before will be exactly the same.
Really, you think you're bullish on change?
Well, I think that the situation in Iraq and Syria is somewhat distinct. I think Iraq has a better prospect of maintaining the same borders for a variety of reasons, whereas while in Syria, I'm not sure, given the present circumstances, how this can be rectified or how it can go back to precisely what it was before without great bloodshed and without some sort of status quo, which is unacceptable to many people.
Bilal, since maybe the Lebanese civil war starting in the 70s, we've seen sort of a steady rise of non-state actors, say starting with Hezbollah, then maybe to the Kurds after the first Gulf War, Hamas. These players kind of seem to proliferate in the sense they're playing a larger and larger role. What I want to know is, do you think that the regimes and the governments in that region see ISIS as a threat like those, or is it something different? And I guess the second part of that question would be, how nervous are the regimes in the region right now, and how nervous ought they be?
Well, I'm going to go back to the first question you
Sure.
raised, and then I'll address the second question. Let me break the news to everybody. There is no redrawing of maps in the Middle East, not today, not tomorrow. The only actor that wants that is ISIS, and it happens to be a pretty weak actor. Nobody in the Middle East wants partition. Nobody wants to redraw maps. 1930s, 1940s, the regional monarchies were not able to do that. 1950s, 1960s, pan-Arabism, Jamal Abdel Nasser was not able to do that. 1970s, you mentioned Lebanese civil war. 1980s, it had the potential to do that, but that didn't happen at all. Saddam Hussein, 1990s, was also trying to redraw the maps of the Middle East. That didn't happen. I'm not sure that ISIS could really do what previous powers that are much more formidable were trying to do. Let me address the other question that you raised. Non-state actors, there's nothing new in the Middle East. Is ISIS now a more formidable non-state actor that really is a new beast? We've never seen anything like it before. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that it's much larger, obviously. It's got significant numbers. It controls a large amount of territory, vast lands, but what people tend to forget is that the majority of those lands are pretty much ungovernable anyway. They happen to have a lot of resources, fair enough. They do have cash that no other non-state actor has ever had in the history of the Middle East, right? They do pose a threat to Syria and Iraq, potentially to other regional countries. For now, I will just limit it to these two, even though they are knocking on the door of Lebanon and Jordan, right? Lebanon has always been an inherently weak state, and anybody could knock on its door, quite frankly. But Jordan is in a better shape than what most people would like to admit, just because, in my opinion, it is a red line for Washington and the Israelis. Does that mean that ISIS really has no potential to move beyond Syria and Iraq? No, it really has to do a lot with the reaction, basically, by the regional countries and the United States. A lot of what ISIS is because of the relative weakness of the adversary. So we'll see within the next few days and weeks what kind of a strategy this administration will come up with, what kind of support it will receive from its partners. And frankly, the reason why it has festered for so long, right, is because of the lethargic reaction of the international community and of the countries in the Middle East.
So you seem pretty sanguine in a sense, compared to...
I'm closer to the gentleman on my right, yeah.
Okay. Mike, that tees it up for you. What do you make of what Bilal just told us?
No, I don't agree with it. I think the KRG is going to become independent at some point. You can see it. There's only the only thing keeping the KRG from declaring independence right now is U.S. and Iranian policy, forcing it to be nominally submissive to Baghdad. But all of the direction seems to me to be toward independence. Whether it will be a formal independence, I mean, it's already almost independent as it is, right? So whether it's a completely formal independence or whether it's a de facto independence, I think that's in the cards. And then I don't see the Assad regime ever really extending its writ again over eastern Syria. That's pretty hard to understand how that can happen. And it's not a matter of simply a matter, even primarily a matter of the policies of the regimes. It's the nature of the society. I mean, this jihadistan from Baghdad to Aleppo is Sunni. It's the Sunni Arab areas of these countries, and they don't want to be ruled by a Shiite regime in Iraq that is subservient to Iran, or an Alawite regime in Syria that is subservient to Iran. And so unless those regimes in Baghdad and Damascus radically change and become more receptive to this large percentage of their population, we're not going to see them become part of those countries again.
You raised the sort of sectarian angle here, which we hadn't mentioned yet, and I'm curious. I'm going to bounce this over to Murtaza. We've tended to look at this particularly the civil war in Syria, as something of a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. What's interesting to me, and I wonder what you make of this about the threat from ISIS, is that it actually threatens both of those orders to an extent. And there's been a lot of talk about whether that will lead to any kind of rapprochement, either with the US or regionally. What's your take on that, and particularly on the idea that the sectarian divide here is a crucial sort of is the linchpin to understanding this?
I wouldn't downplay the importance of the sectarian divide in this conflict, but I don't think it's the overriding factors driving the conflict as well. And I do think that the rise of ISIS has created an opportunity where it's aligned the interests of Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Iran all focusing on this one issue. So it offers the ability to come together and cross over sectarian boundaries, because ISIS, of course, is not beholden to any state actor. It is not a proxy of anyone. And in its ideology, it's been violent and behaved exclusionary to every other sect. So if this problem is allowed to fester, it's a hindrance to the interests of every power in the region. So it offers an opportunity to cross over sectarian boundaries and combat this threat. With regard to would Sunni Arabs be acquiesced to being governed by these present regimes, I say, given their current character, no, but it's not because of the sectarian nature of them. It's because the Assad regime, given his family background and his close control of it, is more of a mafia in its own governance. And its exclusionary nature, it's a kleptocracy, it's behaved extremely brutally towards protesters, and that's what ultimately has alienated people, as opposed to its religious nature. In Iraq, if the government had shown interest in power sharing, and I believe that could be offered an opportunity to rectify those problems as well too. So I don't think that reducing it all to a sectarian issue will give you a clear picture, and those divides can be overcome. They're not totally ineffable.
Yeah, it reminds me of the kind of classic debate about ancient hatreds and whether these sectarian things really go back that far. I want to push back a little bit, though, on the question of whether it may be that there isn't a sectarian cause for these things, but once that cat is sort of out of the bag, once you have these sectarian divisions, it's kind of hard to put back in, right? I mean, do you really have a lot of hope then that once that divide exists, it can be bridged?
I think what's going to have to happen is that, especially in Iraq, the Sunni community will have to have some autonomy, at least for the foreseeable future, because right now the Shia-led government in Iraq has alienated the population. Mm-hmm. But again, I think that these divisions, once they're exacerbated, they can be healed to the point where people can govern again, and a loose system whereby they have control of their own affairs to some degree. And these divides can be healed again, as they've opened in the past, and potentially can be healed again as well.
Bilal, looked like you wanted to jump in there.
No, I mean, it's the primordial versus, a construct, right? This is an old debate. There's tons of scholarship about it. And I really do espouse to the, assumption that this is typically an, realpolitik rivalry between two regional heavyweights that use sectarianism, as a tool, right, to advance their interests. Otherwise, there is plenty of evidence in the region that would negate the sectarian theory, right? There's tons of cooperation going on among sects, whether it's in Lebanon or in other places, that if it were really primordial, then we wouldn't see those instances of cooperation. I mean, Murtaza is absolutely right. I'm not really belittling the religious, sectarian, old animosities, but I think that they're not there to stay forever. I think they're being exploited pretty smartly and shrewdly by these two regional heavyweights, the Saudis and the Iranians. But they sit down tomorrow and they start having some serious talks, and they really start bargaining over a number of hotspots, which I believe they're starting to do already. I mean, we've been hearing a lot about it. Meetings between Saudis and Iranians, a lot of those fires will start to, become less significant in the region.
Yeah. Mike, I'm curious to hear if you have anything to think about that, but I also want to ask you about ISIS in particular. You've written a lot about terrorism, counterterrorism. You wrote this great article back in 2002 called Someone Else's Civil War, which, and I wonder, the interesting thing about ISIS is that we talk about it as a terrorism threat, as a terrorist threat, but of course actually what it's doing is aping a state, right? I mean, it's holding territory, it's providing services, it's trying to build this caliphate, and to grow. From a counterterrorism point of view, whether you're U.S. or Saudi or whoever, does that make a difference in terms of how governments ought to be thinking about the threat from ISIS?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. There was a wonderful piece in the New York Times last week before, I've forgotten already, that showed that a very large number of the top lieutenants in ISIS are former Saddam Hussein officials, or from Saddam's army, which already tells you something. I mean, it's a hybrid between a radical Sunni jihadist organization and Saddam's old regime.
Isn't that a major weakness for ISIS, though? I mean, how long would the interests of those two groups be aligned?
We haven't seen a lot of that, so I'm looking at it more as a strength on the basis of your question.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it may well be that there's a fissure there that could be exploited at some point, but because of the current balance of power the way it is, the kind of options that everybody has on the ground, you've got a choice. If you're a Sunni, let's just say you're a run-of-the-mill Sunni with no really strong, you just want to live your life quietly, you've got a choice between Shiite militias trained in Iran or Hezbollah and Assad in Syria. In Iraq, you've got Shiite militias.
Right.
In Syria, you've got Assad and Hezbollah or ISIS. So which one are you going to choose? I mean, it's a horrible choice, but in the end, you're going to choose ISIS, right? I mean, you're not going to go out. The problem that we have is the problem that we had in Iraq in 2006 when Al Qaeda took root in this area. In Iraq, we have to separate the tribes or the local population from ISIS, as we did with the local population from Iraq or from Al Qaeda, and we can only do that by offering them security. And we're now working through in Iraq. We're working through the Iraqi government. In Syria, we're not working through anybody. So we don't have that. We don't have the card that you need in order to separate them. And what we know on the basis of the fact that these are ex-Saddam guys, they know the country, they have connections in the country, they understand the practicalities of how you rule and so on. So I think it's a mistake, as the president did, to come out and say, look, it's just a terrorist organization, has no roots in the country, and so on and so forth. I think it's much more complex than that and a lot more difficult for us to take care of.
You've opened up the door to this question of what outside actors can do, the United States in particular, but regional actors as well. You seem sort of skeptical about what Obama has presented as far as airstrikes versus something more intensive. Let me bounce that to Murtaza. I'm curious to hear about your thoughts about what you think about at least current U.S. policy of other regional actors, and whether they're hitting the right marks.
I think the best thing the U.S. can do to solve the situation is to decrease the tension throughout the region. So, as we know, as mentioned before, this is primarily, in many ways, a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of course, is a U.S. ally, and correspondingly, the U.S. has influence over its policies to some degree. Iran is nominally at least an enemy of the U.S., and as such, the U.S. has no leverage with them in this discussion. If the detente can be worked out between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which there's some indication that they're exploring as well too, it would do a lot to reduce the tensions in Syria and also open the door to a transition where Assad leaves on a non-zero-sum basis, where he gets to leave intact with his regime, not facing any major reprisals violently. And so he can step down from power, as opposed to the situation he's presently in, where he's in what he believes to be a fight to the death, and this is leading to the exacerbation of the conflict. If Iran and Saudi Arabia can work out such a deal to help end the conflict on a negotiated basis, the U.S. best policy would be to encourage that. And that would require engaging Iran as well and addressing some Iranian strategic threats which make them view Assad as indispensable. Mm-hmm. So it's time to be pragmatic in addressing this issue as opposed to ideological. And many people have died in Syria, and the war shows no signs of abating. And this offers the best possible way to step down from it. And this threat of ISIS has opened the door to the U.S. engaging Iran and also pressing that solution regionally, and that could be the best possible means to ending this conflict.
I'm glad you made that point. We're gonna get back to that. And I actually want, Bilal, I hope you can pick that right up, and then we'll come back to Mike and Murtaza on this topic too, about is there an opportunity here for the United States and Iran? For many years, we've had these fleeting opportunities going all the way back to Afghanistan, of course, with the Taliban. In many occasions, Lebanon, a couple of years later. This is a recurring theme. Does this finally have the interests aligned of Washington and Tehran, putting aside the nuclear talks and all the other things? What's your basic feeling about that?
I think the word partnership has been used pretty loosely nowadays in the debate. It doesn't have to really reach the level of partnership. There could easily be tacit cooperation. And you mentioned the cases where the United States and Iran have tacitly cooperated before, and sometimes actively, although a lot of analysts would not like to acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. Specifically in Iraq, where Iranian commanders and American commanders, probably not at the same time, going in the same room talking to Iraqis. And as they're getting out of that same room, they see each other, they probably shake hands, I'm not sure. But there's been that experience between these two sides, whether it's in Afghanistan and Iraq, and potentially now, where they have tacitly cooperated. I think it would be a strategic mistake if they were to partner. I think it would be premature.
Why?
Because there's that hanging fruit, which is the Iranian nuclear issue. I mean, this is the biggest issue that should be settled first, because it delineates intentions of the Iranians, how far they really are willing to cooperate, and it would make everything else so much easier. Is there a common interest in defeating a common enemy? Yes, absolutely. But there are costs for that. There's a pretty heavy price tag for that. It would alienate the other partners, and I'm talking about the Gulf states. And then you start, coming up with a cost-benefit assessment. You really lose a group of nations, 6 nations, pretty oil-rich nations that have a lot of significance, right, in the global economy and in the security of the region for the sake of partnering with Iran. Can you have both at the same time? Potentially, yes, but can the administration do that? I don't really have much confidence in administration balancing between these two. It's going to have there's going to be conversation for quite a long time to how to balance between these two competing interests, because frankly, it's hard to understand paranoia in the Arab Gulf about Iran, and this is not going to go anytime soon, right? Some are hedging their bets, some are much more pragmatic than others, but the biggest country, which is Saudi Arabia, still is very much unsure about Iranian intentions and about Iranian designs, whether it's in Bahrain, whether it's in other places where the Saudis have much influence, obviously in Lebanon as well, and in the Palestinian territories. But if you mind if I just go back very quickly on the issue of ISIS and capabilities in U.S. policy. Sure. I think the Element has crafted a very ambitious strategy that's got all the elements basically for defeating this organization. But I think now there is a healthy dose of realism in terms of what the United States can really achieve. I think the best they can do is disrupt the enemy until all the other elements, which is fixing the politics of Iraq, right, which is going to take a long time. It's going to take more than a week. Finding a rebel movement in Syria that you can be really comfortable with and you can vet and arm. It's going to take also more than a week. And figuring out, obviously, how are you going to form this coalition of states that would buy into fighting ISIS. But the problem is you can't stay on the sidelines as all of these things are materializing, because again, they're going to take time, and the president is pretty clear about how long they will take, right? You cannot stay on the sidelines while the enemy is growing and gaining new capabilities and actually becoming a threat to the homeland, which currently is non-existent. There's a lot of exaggeration of what the ISIS can, what kind of a threat it poses to the homeland, and what kind of a threat does it pose to the regional order, right? Whatever that means, right? But for now, it's pretty local. It is just limited to Iraq and Syria. It could morph easily with time, which is why this tactical mission of further disrupting it and keeping it on the run, right, is very essential, which is why this is the prism through which we should be seeing airstrikes, right? We all understand, everybody agrees that there's a huge consensus, right, unanimous consensus on airstrikes will not do the job. Fair enough, we understand that. But we need to understand what they're specifically designed to do. And it's not just airstrikes, obviously. You can also lob a few missiles from sea. maybe use strategic bombers, I'm not sure. But anything that would limit the risk to those pilots, right? To disrupt the enemy, keep it on the run, and on the defensive, not on the offensive, so that it doesn't materialize into this threat that everybody keeps talking about, which has not materialized yet.
Okay. I want to talk about the second part of what your answer to, but first, Mike, I want to go back to the Iran question with your deep-seated love and affection for the regime in Tehran is no secret.
Right.
And anyone who follows your Twitter account. I'm assuming that you are more skeptical for about the chances of any rapprochement than our other panelists. Am I right?
Rapprochement between?
Iran and the U.S. over this issue of ISIS.
Depends on what you mean by rapprochement. I think we're in an alignment with Iran, which both sides are denying. I mean, it reminds me of watching, did you ever see Riverdance? When the Irish dancers, they're all lined up in a row on the stage.
Is that what they do in Tehran? Is that
they do? Well, they're doing it with America. They're all doing at the same time. They do exactly the same thing, but they don't look at each other. So our policy. Our policy toward Baghdad is identical to the Iranian policy toward Baghdad. Our policy toward the KRG is identical to the policy toward the Iranian policy toward the KRG. Our policies in Lebanon are overlapping with the policies of the Iranians. And every time an American official is asked, "Are you coordinating with the Iranians?" "Oh, no coordination with the Iranians, absolutely none." Although the White House spokesman did today say, "Well, there have been some back-channel discussions." Right, there have been some back, but we're not going to coordinate on any military action. So we're not coordinating with the Iranians on military action, but we are advising the Iraqi forces on the ground in Iraq what to do, and the Iranians are informing the Iraqi forces on the ground what to do. But we're not coordinating with Iran about this. And there was this siege of Amerli in Iraq, the Turkmen town, and we attacked from the air, and the Iranian-backed militias attacked from the ground. And we put ISIS on the run, and the Iranian-backed militias took over the place and then kept the Kurds out. And Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Quds force, was reportedly on the ground. There was a picture of him that was widely disseminated there. But we're not coordinating with them, okay? We are not coordinating. It just happens that they're benefiting from our
why
power.
Why is that a bad thing? I mean, isn't that smart diplomacy in a sense? I mean, why is it bad to maintain the public lie and to have something different happening in the background?
Well, the question is, what's your goal? Right? What's your goal and how are you going to achieve it? What's our strategic goal in the Middle East? What's our number one strategic problem? And I believe that our number one strategic problem is the Iranian nuclear issue. Right? That's not going to be solved by this administration's approach. And the approach of working with Iran to help deliver up the Arab world to it is not going to help us with that problem. We repeatedly look, not just look, we are in a position of supplicant, asking the Iranians to work with us. And that, many of you probably saw Ali Khamenei came out of the hospital today, joyously happy, describing the great fun he had while recuperating from prostate surgery by watching the Americans lie on television about whether or not they were going to they wanted to work with the Iranians. And he said, they keep denying it, but John Kerry personally asked us to work together with them, and Wendy Sherman, he has that woman, right, which is his deputy, Wendy Sherman, and so on and so forth. And he named all these specific examples where the Americans have come as supplicants to them to work with them. And he said, you know what, we're not going to do it.
And you believe him?
I do believe him. Yeah, I do believe him. And it's a sad day when you believe Ali Khamenei about your own government's behavior more than you do your own government.
I'm going to open it up to the audience in just a second, but I want to ask you just one follow-up about Bilal was talking about how to sort of sketch something of a defense of the policy that we heard Obama lay out, if I can characterize it that way.
Still waiting for execution. I mean,
Right. Right.
Speech is a speech.
Speech is a speech, and plan is a plan, but you don't know what's going to happen. Did you find any of that persuasive? I did, parts of it, and I'm wondering what you thought.
Oh, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I found it absolutely persuasive. What we have now is an ISIS containment policy.
Right.
That's what we have, and the president has been pressed between three different desires. One desire is just to keep the Middle East at arm's length. The second desire is a desire to create a concert system, in my view, with the Iranians, to bring them in as Nixon brought China in. This is, he can't state that. It's a politically controversial thing to do, but I believe that if you look at the direction of his policy, that's what he wants to do. And the third thing is he wants to look more forceful and in charge in foreign affairs than he has over the last summer. And so he has established a system, this system of airstrikes and a nominal coalition around it that will allow him to be seen to be taking action against ISIS for the next 2 years. But in his public statements, including in the long Peter Baker article today, he's made it very clear that he's going to hand this off to the next president. They're saying it. John Kerry said, we're going to solve this in 3 years. That puts it 1 year into the next administration. And they've also said something else, if you look very closely at the statements they're making. Syria, that's the last and the toughest part of this thing. And that's not going to be solved until the end. So we're going to take some action in Iraq. We're not going to take much action in Syria. That's the next president's problem. So we're going to hand this off. That's what's going to happen.
Well, you made a little hand motion to signal me.
Yeah,
want to follow up? Yeah.
just very quickly before we turn it over. I didn't want to leave this room without saying this first, because I think that's the most important thing I'm going to say today. We should be less concerned about the end of Sykes-Picot and much more concerned about the continuous failure since the days of the First World War, right, and that infamous agreement between the British and the French of the Arab state system. It's just that simple. Their inability to incorporate ethnic minorities, to create accountable, inclusive systems of governance, which this problem has festered to this day and has created all the issues that we're raising today. Probably not why the Iranian centrifuges are running today, right? But all the other issues about sectarianism, why it has become a much worse issue, about borders, about rivalries between the Iranians and the Saudis. All of that is influenced by this grand narrative of the inability of governments in the region to create accountable, inclusive systems of government.
But wait a second. You were describing, you said, that this is a problem of it's not inclusive, there's minorities that haven't been integrated. It was only about 40 years ago that this country would have fit that description. We're still, if you watch the news in the past couple of months, there's still an element of that. Is it fair to put the onus on a state system that is actually relatively young to do that as quickly as we would like? Isn't it just a matter of time?
Well, the Arab uprisings were supposed to usher a new era, right? But the problem is that the old conservative order, and it's not just the Gulf states, and others as well, have reversed that, and they have very aggressively done that. And then does that mean that that moment has evaporated forever? I'm not sure. I mean, history will tell. But you're right that it's probably premature to say, or it's unfair to say that, it has not taken a long time for these peoples in the region to create finally accountable and inclusive systems of government. But by now, we should have had some kind of hope, and the Arab uprisings were that bright moment of hope, but it's just that the forces of conservatism basically have intervened pretty aggressively.
Fair enough. Okay, I'd like to open up our discussion to questions. Before I do so, I'm just going to make a couple of reminders. Please raise your hand. If I call on you, please wait for one of the microphones to find its way to you. We have 4 microphones. When you get the mic, please identify yourself, your name, and whether you have some sort of affiliation. And most importantly, please ask a question. We want to get as much of a conversation as we can and have as much of an answers from our panel. So please ask a question, one question. Okay, let's go ahead. Why don't we begin right here, ma'am, here.
Thank you. My name is Fredrika Sidorov. I'm not affiliated with an organization. I'd like to pose a question to Mr. Saab, please. You mentioned that the territories that ISIS is now inhabiting in northern Iraq and eastern Syria are in some way intrinsically ungovernable. Can you describe what you meant when you said that? Ungovernable?
Desert. It's that simple. I mean, there are obviously some urban areas there, but this is not exactly resource-rich areas. When when the moment when I'll be much more concerned, obviously, is when they get much further to the cities, right? Like Baghdad, Erbil, where there was attempt, obviously, but clearly that was stopped due to U.S. intervention, obviously. The borderlands of Syria and Iraq, I mean, that border was always porous, and it wasn't really that much difficult for them to acquire influence and make advances. Obviously, they've gotten a lot of support from, and you mentioned that earlier, Justin, they got a lot of support from the Sunni tribes. I mean, they're not alone in this fight. They happen to be at the forefront of a Sunni insurgency, whatever you want to call it. They happen to be the most brutal, obviously. But they're not alone. They're obviously being aided by some pretty, experienced commanders who have served in Saddam Hussein's army, and I would specifically mention one individual, and that's Azzat al-Duri, who few people have really emphasized throughout this conflict, and he's got a pretty large hand, basically, in a lot of their advances.
Who was that, Bilal? Can you tell us about him?
Azzat al-Duri used to work, I guess he was the deputy of Saddam Hussein, red-haired, in Saddam's pretty inner clique. He was pretty much trusted, one of the very few people who were trusted by the Iraqi leader. He still has a very active role today. I don't know where he is, whether he's aided by the Saudis or some other regional country, I'm not sure. But him, along with others who have been vetted in combat, have been aiding this movement and organization and allowed them to make rapid advances.
This gentleman here on the aisle.
Hi, my name's Stephen Lodekite. I'm affiliated with the U.S. Army, inactive right now. My question is for all of you, what kind of indirect consequences do you guys foresee in the next 10 to 20 years with this new campaign we're doing? So,
Military campaign?
yeah, this new one we're doing.
Murtaza, why don't you take that one?
Well, the indirect consequences will depend on what actions are taken in order to combat this new threat. So the indirect consequence, as I alluded to, could be greater regional cooperation leading to an agreement on other issues as well too, due to shared interests to combat ISIS, or the indirect consequence could be the exacerbation of those same differences depending on what steps the administration takes. So it really depends. The next couple of years will be crucial to see if the approach taken is consensus building and there's an agreement between different regional powers which have heretofore been at odds to cooperate to combat this threat, or if you see things dividing further along sectarian lines and this politicization of sectarian identities. So it depends. In the next 10, 20 years, it's not really clear to see what the correct consequences will be, but the next few years we'll scope that out and then we can give you a better answer.
Mike, do you have any thoughts about that? Unintended consequences? It's an interesting question.
Well, I think one of the big things that we've seen, I think President Obama has been a very consequential president with regard to the Middle East, in that he's changed the expectation that the United States will be the leader in the region. This current operation is a movement in the opposite direction. It goes against the grain. I mean, he's been really trying to move out of the region as much as possible, and now he's kind of coming back in. So it isn't. There's still a question over what our approach will look like when the dust settles. But I think his inclination is very strong to stay out. I don't agree actually with Murtaza at all about this being an opportunity for the region to come together. It's actually the region is blowing apart. I also don't agree that ISIS this is a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I think there are two alliance systems in the region, one led by Saudi Arabia and one by Iran. But there are a lot of things on the ground that are going on outside of the alliance system. The Arab Spring was one of them. The rise of ISIS is another. There's just a lot of chaos on the ground that neither one of the sides can really control very well. I think it's the middle. We're going to see much more of the same that we've been seeing. A lot of fractious, brutal conflicts on the ground, and in the absence of an American leadership, no international force that is capable of making chaos, order out of chaos. It's only the United States that can do that, and thus far, it has not wanted to play that role.
Yes, here in the front, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Anam. I'm from City College. I'm a master's student. And my question was, I guess, to Bilal and Murtaza, since you don't agree that this is a proxy war. I think that the Saudi Arabia and Iran are two heavyweights in the region. So it's interesting to see that the president wants to arm the moderates from the Syrian rebels. And right now, Saudi's taken the lead in trying to train them. So what do you guys have to say about that? Thank you.
Bilal, why don't you start?
I was asked the same exact question in a recent interview on Al Jazeera America by Ray Suarez. It's amazing. I don't think I had a good answer to that, but I'll try one more time. Actually, I'll say the exact same answer. I have little confidence in Saudi capabilities to engage in any of the activities that you described, frankly. I am much more leaning on Turkey and Jordan to do that. However, I have strong reservations about the Turkish role as well, because they seem to be providing some kind of support, and I'm not putting really my finger on what kind of support and how high is it in terms of abetting ISIS, whether receiving them or putting them in their hospitals and treating them. I'm not sure how damning the evidence is, but it's out there. But Jordan and Turkey have a much more significant role than the Saudis to combat ISIS, basically. I mean, they have never done that before, frankly. They do have quite an impressive counter-radicalization program inside the kingdom, but it works inside the kingdom. They have formed some pretty considerable counter-terrorism institutions following 2003, if you remember 2004, when there was a pretty heavy insurrection inside the kingdom, led by the time by Osama bin Laden himself. But that failed, obviously, because, and it was quite significant. It was in some pretty densely populated urban areas, and it was all over the place. And it was not just in Riyadh and Jeddah, but some other areas too. But they ended up mastering that campaign, and they ousted the terrorists. But activities outside the kingdom, I really have less confidence in what the Saudis can do.
Mike, did you want to put an or in there?
I did actually, even though you didn't want me to answer. I have a lot to say on that.
Out, Mike.
That's
Shocking, shocking.
First of all, the president has not wanted to arm the Syrian rebels. It's been one of the most striking aspects of his policy. And the call, which came in May in his speech at West Point to begin a process of arming them, was a lot of smoke and mirrors. There was no briefing to the Congress beforehand, and in the hearings that were held by Congress afterwards, you had Adam Smith, for instance, the ranking member of the Armed Services Committee, a Democrat, who was berating the representatives of the administration, saying, you know, it's a serious thing to ask us for $500 million to arm Syrian rebels. Don't you think you should actually have a plan? The money has still not been appropriated. It's going to be appropriated in the next few months, maybe by the end of the year, hopefully by the end of the year. Then we're going to start the actual training program. There won't be a Syrian soldier who will be trained by it for another year, at least. There'll be a lot of time to slow it down. So I'm not expecting to see large numbers of Syrian soldiers come out of that. It really depends much more on us than on the Saudis. The way I see it right now, this program is to be watched, and if it speeds up quickly and all of a sudden we see large numbers of Syrian soldiers trained and actually put into the field, then everything I'm saying isn't operative, and our policy has changed. But I've been watching this for 3 years, and it's been do nothing for 3 years, and so I'm expecting more of the same. The way I see it is it was a bargain between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and the bargain was this: we'll come toward you to a certain extent as part of your coalition they don't like ISIS, Saudi Arabia, but they also don't like Iran, as you know. So we'll come toward you to a certain extent on your coalition with respect to Iraq. But don't think for a second that we're going to sit by and watch the United States align with Assad the way it's aligning with Iran and Baghdad, right? We need a serious train and equip program for the Free Syrian Army, that is the Sunnis of Syria. And that's why President Obama has pushed that off to year 3 of the 3-year program, right? We're going to buy off the Saudis in the meantime, and we're going to avoid operations in Syria. so as not to be aligning with Iran there. And then we're going to focus on our airstrikes more on Iraq than anywhere else. There may be a few token airstrikes on Syria just for manhood purposes to say we really have a holistic anti-ISIS program, but it's really going to focus on Iraq. You keep that in mind and watch it. I'll be so happy if I'm totally wrong, but I have been totally right on this from the beginning until now.
Yeah.
Justin,
Yes.
just very quickly, since we're in the House of Foreign Affairs, consult the piece by my very good friend, Mike's colleague, my former colleague, Ken Pollock. It takes an army to defeat an army. Read that piece. It's very well written. Ken, you owe me.
Okay, gentleman with the glasses here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Dan Turk. I'm unaffiliated. Question to Michael. Do you expect to see a nuclear Iran? If so, when? And if not, why not?
That's a great question. And the simple answer is I don't know. But it's totally in that, completely in the hands of the Iranians. There's nothing we're going to do that's going to stop them from getting a bomb. All the initiative is in their hands. I'm not expecting on November 25th, when the year ends, to see a comprehensive agreement between the United States and Iran. If there is a comprehensive agreement between us and them, it's going to be because we caved. And it will be a very, very bad agreement that will basically they are, if we think about it in football terms, they're at first and goal. We paid them in sanctions relief not to run the play, and they agreed for a variety of purposes to do that. They've offered us through this negotiating process to stay at first and goal if we'll continue to pay them indefinitely. And we're either going to accept that deal and call it fabulous and call it an historic change, or we're not going to accept it, and then we're going to have to see what happens. But it'll be up to the Iranians. We're not going to stop it.
Okay, let's go here to the middle aisle here, gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Mohammed Mahmoudi. I'm from Iran. I'm the professor of politics in Bocconi University, Milan, Italy, as well as NYU here. Okay, my question is going to be slightly long. I apologize first. So,
Try to keep it short, please, okay?
Sure.
And can I have a question mark at the end?
Yeah,
Sure. Sure. Okay, what amuses me is how we are kind of ignoring and we are not discussing the role of Israel in all of the ISIS discussion. The fact is that, well, what Iranian government believes that is that all the ISIS, or as they call them, Daesh, was like a card that was made by US government to put pressure on Iran, because like the Daesh's first enemy, as they call it, is Iran, and I believe that. And they believe that it kind of backfired, and now they both have a same goal, as you mentioned, which was fighting Daesh. And they are mentioning that they are playing that as a card in their nuclear attacks.
I'm going to ask you to wrap it up with a question now, please.
Okay, so now the question is that why do you think that Daesh is not a threat for Israel? Daesh is insisting that they are not a threat for Israel, and Israel seems really not concerned about that. Why is that?
Murtaza, you want to take that one?
Well, I think today ISIS is not a threat to Israel, and Israeli actions are a rational response to the fact that they're not threatening Israel today. But that doesn't mean that they could not threaten Israel in the future. And there have been rumors that ISIS infiltrated the Golan Heights and is nearing Israeli borders. So that may change in the future, but right now there is no direct threat to Israel from ISIS, not because of any sort of nefarious reason behind that, because rationally there's no threat to them to the borders. If this suggestion by Iran that ISIS has been created by the United States, or a popular suggestion, I don't think there's much to substantiate that, and I think it's just something that has been used to attribute what ISIS's actions are, because all Iran's framing of these narratives are all between itself and the United States. Some things are not related to that at all. So I don't think that the fact that ISIS is not a threat to Israel today is indicative that it won't be a threat in the future, and it very well may be. And if I could just add one thing to the previous gentleman's point before his question, because somewhat ties into that as well too. will Iran get a nuclear bomb? Will that be the end result of all these talks? And I think the answer is no, because the fact Iran is not looking for a nuclear bomb per se. It's looking for the breakout capacity to create a bomb in the future, which is what's being alleged. So this end of negotiations and discussion will not end in that, and I'm quite confident in that answer. Whether it's going to end in an agreement which some people define as satisfactory or not is something else we can't say yet. I think there are hopeful signs. In fact, most people did not expect the negotiations to get to this point as well. So I think your answer should be very confidently no, but then what the nuances will remain to see.
Mike, you want to weigh in on this quickly on this Israel question?
Oh yeah, I just got back from Israel and I had meetings in the foreign ministry and in the prime minister's office, and they're actually quite concerned about Daesh. About ISIS. Their major concern is Jordan. They're afraid that if it spreads, it could destabilize Jordan. But they're also concerned about it for themselves. They wouldn't accept my view of the world as much as I wish they would, which is to see your country as the major malefactor in the region. They agree on the nuclear thing for sure, but there's an open question for them now that the border of the Golan is no longer controlled by Assad's forces. So there's a little bit of growing nostalgia for Assad and his ability to keep order on the Syrian-Israeli border. It's a very upsetting attitude for the Israelis to have, but they have it.
Yes, the young lady on the end of the aisle here.
You don't mean the country, you mean the regime, right?
Which?
Of Iran. Just to keep it
Yes. I make a strong distinction between the Iranian people and the Iranian regime. You're right. I did not mean your country. I just meant the lousy people who rule it.
Good save.
Keep it nuanced.
Yep. Nuance is what I'm all about.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Rima Hebrawi. I'm a Master's of International Relations student at New York University. My question is for Mr. Doran, kind of going off on the conversation we've had with the administration pushing back its strategy for intervention in Syria and Iraq. What do you foresee happening in the future? More covert coordination with Iran, possibly Turkey, or other actors as well?
I think that the president is going to try to hold this policy because the goal, I think the most important decision that the president made, he made before he ever became president, and that was to restructure relations with the Middle East and to go down in history as the president who ended wars and didn't start new ones. I think that's deep in him, and he looks at all these problems like we're looking at, and he says to advisors, okay, what do I need to do in order to win? He looks at what they say and he says, first of all, I don't see victory at the end of that. I just see deeper and deeper involvement. And so he really wants to keep it at arm's length. And so he set up this operation which will allow him to contain ISIS, to destabilize it a little bit, as Bilal said, but not enough to actually win. You can't win this if you don't have a Syria policy. You can't. As long as they have a safe haven in Syria, they're going to be dominating the Iraq. You can't win it unless you have an inclusive government in Iraq that the people on the ground in the Sunni areas feel represents them on some level. So I really just see what we're seeing right now, projected on for 2 years. We could have this meeting 2 years from now, and most of the key problems are going to be pretty much like they are right now.
Okay, let's go to the woman on the end of the aisle here. Yes.
Thank you, Marina Theodotou. I have the question for the panel. It's a two-part question. The first one, what is, in your opinion, the role of Turkey and Egypt in the region, and also with ISIS especially? And also the second part of the question is, do you think ISIS could expand into Libya with the quagmire that's happening there? Thank you.
Who wants to take that? Bilal?
Let's start with the second part. It certainly is a possibility. I think I've been hearing some news recently of members of other Al-Qaeda affiliates actually leaving their affiliates and deciding to join ISIS just because they happen to be today the top dog in the jihadist universe, right? There is AQIM, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, so I don't know how much of a centralized movement it is. I'll leave it to other seasoned terrorism experts. But I bet you there will be some splinter groups who might decide to join ISIS, just because, again, they happen to have the most resources at this point. The first question was on Turkish role and Egyptian role. I think the Egyptians have pretty much, their hands full as far as their own security problems, what's happening in the Sinai. They've got their own brand of jihadist militancy that they have to deal with. What kind of a role they can play? I mean, that role, just broadly speaking on that, I'm going to say, has been pretty much reduced since, what's happened in Egypt. They have been quite, frankly, humiliated as a people and a government, the extent to which that role has been reduced. I mean, this is a very proud country, obviously, with a tremendous history of intellectualism and politics, right? And now it's certainly, at the mercy of, frankly, Gulf states, specifically the UAE and Saudi Arabia. That role, will it find some life again sometime in the near future? I really have my doubts, because the economy is just in such bad shape that the only countries that can save it right now is, but obviously for their own reasons and their own opportunism, is Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The Turks have kind of a mixed role as far as ISIS, frankly. Like I mentioned before, I hinted at some kind of weird double game they're playing as far as ISIS, abetting the enemy, but also at the same time being concerned about what advances they can make into, Iraq and obviously the Turkish border. But beyond that, I'll leave more details and nuances to my colleagues.
Do you want to add anything, either of you? Murtaza, you want to add something to that?
I can say to the point about Egypt as well too. They've played the role you alluded to earlier, the very conservative forces, and they've played a hugely counter-revolutionary role over the last couple of years in the Middle East. And they've been at the forefront of this pushback against this wave of liberalization, which seemed to be coming at that time. And of course, that's all been bankrolled by the Gulf states, who've seen a huge interest in pushing back on this wave. And the election of Mohamed Morsi, the president of Egypt, was a huge threat to Saudi Arabia and to these countries because of the fact that the Muslim Brotherhood offered an alternative model of government, which was a threat to their monarchical model of government at that time. So when they saw the Muslim Brotherhood come to power in democratic elections, that was a threat in the sense they need to have it eliminated because, the next year in Saudi or the other UAE countries, the population could ask for an Islamic democracy as seemed to have come to power in Egypt. So I think that Egypt will continue to be reduced to a front line role against the popular forces in the region, which inevitably have some Islamist component to them. And it will be very difficult to take the leadership role that it seemed to have been taking for a moment under Mohamed Morsi.
With regard to Egypt, one of the really interesting things about the conflict between Israel and Hamas that just ended is it really shined a light on what I would call the status quo alliance, which is Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the UAE, and we could probably add a couple of others on there. And they are against, in general, against Iran, and also against the Muslim Brotherhood, as Murtaza said, and then therefore very much against Hamas, which is both Muslim Brotherhood and Iran-backed. But they don't, as Bilal said, of course, Egypt doesn't have a big role, doesn't have the big regional role that it used to have. So its activities are mainly contained in its, in its immediate neighborhood. Benjamin Netanyahu spoke during the war about a new political horizon for Israel. Oh, of course, Israel is aligned with these status quo powers, which is one of the more fascinating aspects of this. That there have been cooperation in the past to a certain level, but now it's at a new level and on a public level that they're coordinating with these powers, and including with Saudi Arabia. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that this is a new political horizon, but it remains to be seen whether that can be leveraged by anyone. Certainly the United States is not trying to leverage it for anything in the north, anything in this band of chaos from Baghdad to Beirut. And that's where the Turks are mainly operating. I mean, the Turks butt up against the Egyptians because they, together with the Qataris, are supporting the Muslim Brotherhood, and they came to friction over Hamas. But Turkey doesn't really have much influence in that in the southern area. Its problem is really with Syria and Iraq. it's getting a lot of bad press, a lot from the friends of the Israelis who are angry with it primarily because of the Hamas issue and because of the antagonism between Erdogan and Netanyahu and a lot of Erdogan's anti-Semitic statements and so forth. But some of the statements that are being made about Turkey, I think, are a bit exaggerated. That it's supporting ISIS, that it supports radical Islam across the region. I don't think that's true. I think the Turkish policy towards Syria, the standoffishness from the coalition that the president's putting together and so forth, is just fear. They have the fear on the Kurdish issue, fear of getting deeply involved. I mean, they're right on the border there with the Syrian conflict. If they get sucked into it and we evaporate as allies, then they're going to be left holding the bag. So they're being standoffish. They are playing all sides against the middle, or at least they have feelers out in a lot of different directions. But so does everybody else in this game, because nobody knows how it's going to end.
Yes, the gentleman over there. Yes, you, with the blue sweater. Sorry, the blue tie there. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, looks like a sweater.
All right, thank you. My name is Rob McGillis, and I'm with Transperfect Business Solutions. Bilal mentioned that the red line for the U.S. and Israel would be the Jordanian territory being compromised by ISIS. So we've seen a lot of red lines from both Israel and the U.S. So where do you see the actual turning point being for action from America and Israel?
It's a great question. You put me on the spot. Yeah, I mean, yes, when it comes to scorecard, when it comes to what the president said regarding the chemical weapons issue and that red line, yeah, I mean, you feel a little uneasy about another red line in Jordan, but I really feel strongly about this one, and because really it directly affects Israeli security. And one of the core tenets of U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East really is Israeli security. That has been a constant for a very long time. Could I be wrong about that? Yeah, I mean, absolutely, yes. But I feel very strongly about that red line. Jordan and Israel go back, way back as far as these intertwined security of both countries. So I know that Mike knows much more about that, so if you want to add any nuance to that.
I didn't completely understand the question. What's the red line that
if there would be like U.S. intervention should that red line be crossed, right?
Meaning, what is the red line, though? Jordan. What if Jordan is destabilized?
Jordan's destabilized. It's in cahoots. What would the United States do?
I would expect that if Jordan were destabilized, then we probably would see some kind of action by the Israelis, certainly action by the United States as well. I would expect that.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. I'm going to go way in the back. The gentleman raising his hand way in the back row there. There he is.
My name is Chandrakant Pancholi from Overseas India Weekly. Rather than working on an inclusive government in Iraq, why we don't work on dividing Iraq into three parts, Sunni, Shia, and then Kurds, because Kurds are going to go away anyway. And even though it is politically unpopular, why we don't put boots on the ground to surround the ISIS and finish it, rather than let them regroup it and just disrupt only and regroup it and keep going on and on forever.
So there are two questions there, really. They're both interesting. One is what about partition for Iraq, essentially, as an idea for the future? And two, why not boots on the ground? Let's do a sort of lightning round. All three of you take on those two questions as quickly as you can, and see if we can solve those two issues in the remaining time we've got. Start with Mike. Yeah, we'll go down the line.
So on partition, we're not going to do it. One, because it's a holdover from our Iraq policy. For the longest time, we've been trying to hold the country together, and we're on that default setting. And secondly, we don't want to upset a number of actors, including Iran, if we were to push for Kurdish independence. So just sort of maintaining the status quo is, I think, the easiest path for us at this point. But I do agree. Eventually, it seems the Kurdistan is going to go independent. How that's going to happen and what our policy will be at the time is anyone's guess. The second question was why now boots on the ground? The American people don't want it. The president sees it as contrary to his legacy.
Murtaza?
So with regards to the first question about why don't we partition Iraq, the sectarian differences in the conflict have been well publicized, but there's not a lot of popular will in Iraq to see the country carved up into 3 pieces. So in many cases, in much respects, you'll be dividing the country against the will of many people there. And this would be hugely bloody and expensive undertaking. And secondly, it would be totally against the last many years of U.S. policy, which has been to retain Iraq's territorial integrity. So it's not plausible, it's not in the interest of most people, not desires of most people, so it simply won't happen. And secondly, with regards to putting boots on the ground, as Mike mentioned, it's a political impossibility. The U.S. does not have any appetite for another ground war in the Middle East. And secondly, there's no guarantee that that war will not exacerbate these problems and mire the U.S. in another huge undertaking, much as Iraq was, and perhaps even worse given what circumstances have become now. So I think the short answer is it's not necessarily in anyone's interest to do those things. It's not possible to do those things. And there's no one who's really pushing for those things either. So I don't think you'll see boots on the ground or enforced partition of Iraq anytime soon.
Bilal, last word?
Let me not repeat what was so beautifully said. I'll just ask one question. What do you do with Baghdad? Let's say you partition the entire country. What do you do with the capital? That's the most complex issue as far as partition.
With that, you guys have given us a lot to discuss at the reception upstairs and beyond. Can we please give our panel a round of applause? Thank you.